Okay, so the nutrient I will be presenting on is methionine, abbreviated MET. It is one of the 9 essential amino acids, and it's said to be one of the most valuable sulfur-containing amino acids due to how it can be used to generate the other sulfur-containing amino acids, such as cysteine. Methionine is most notably synthesized in the mitochondria, the plastids, and the cytosol of higher plants, where it is derived from aspartite, cysteine, and nitrogen methyl tetrahydrofolate. A higher plant is characterized by vascular tissue that provides efficient nutrient delivery to cells, allowing these plants to grow stems. A few examples of higher plants include fern, hemp, and pine, all of which cannot be digested by the human body, but can be digested by the animals that we eat. There is no endogenous source due to the human body's inability to synthesize methionine or any essential amino acid for that matter. Therefore, methionine can only be extracted from the diet. The main sources of methionine are eggs, poultry, and meat, with pork being the most abundant in fulfilling the daily recommended intake with just one serving. That can either be like a piece of cured ham or a singular pork chop. Dairy provides an adequate amount of methionine, but not nearly as much as the other animal sources. Plants in general are very low in methionine. Seeds can contain a little more methionine, but are not yet a significant source. Currently, there is research happening to see how methionine levels can be increased in plants and seeds, but some of the only plants that serve as an adequate source of methionine already are complete proteins like Brazilian nuts and hemp seeds, but even so, it takes multiple servings of each to reach the recommended amount. Very little food in general is enriched or fortified with methionine, but developed countries have started enriching soy products with methionine to aid those with diet restrictions, but overall, many foods that contain any level of methionine got it from whole ingredients. Culture, location, and the diet of livestock will all affect levels of methionine in someone's diet. For instance, if someone partakes in a vegan or a vegetarian diet for religious purposes, it's going to take more food to fulfill the recommended amount of methionine because there are just limited resources that that person can consume, mostly being like tofu, seeds, and some nuts and beans. Regions of the world that suffer from protein deficiency will often be deficient in methionine as well. And if livestock do not have access to plants and feed with sufficient methionine levels, it will not reflect adequate methionine nutrition composition for human consumption. Because this has been an issue in the past, industrial feed is often supplemented with methionine, now at least. Methionine is a component of protein, so it will follow the digestive path of protein as well, starting in the stomach. Once a methionine-containing product reaches the gastric juices of the stomach, hydrochloric acid from parietal cells will denature the protein itself and activate pepsinogen released by chief cells into pepsin. Pepsin will then hydrolyze interior peptide bonds, all contributing to the end result of polypeptides. Those polypeptides will then enter the small intestine, where pancreatic enzymes will become activated and digest those polypeptides into tripeptides, dipeptides, and free amino acids, which can all then be absorbed. The majority of free amino acids, including methionine, will be absorbed by the duodenum, like right here, of the small intestine. To get through the brush border, the intestinal cell and into the portal vein, methionine will require a sodium-dependent carrier to perform passive and active functions across cell membranes like any other free amino acid. So the first step of methionine absorption is sodium binding to the amino acid transporter in the cell membrane, like right here. This will increase the carrier's affinity for the amino acid itself, to which they'll bind together and form a sodium amino acid cotransporter, which will then transport the sodium with the amino acid into the intestinal cell. The sodium will then leave the intestinal cell through the sodium-potassium pump. Any methionine that isn't used by the intestinal cell for protein synthesis will enter the portal vein through a facilitative transporter right here across the basolateral membrane. And in general, studies observing the absorption efficiency of methionine depending on protein quality showed that low protein quality in plant sources were associated with a greater difficulty in absorption of the amino acid. This was due to the conversion of methionine into SAM and protein synthesis competing for utilization of soluble methionine. So once the free methionine enters the portal blood, it will be carried to the liver, where at least half of the methionine will be transported by the amino acid transport MNAT into the liver. The rest of the methionine will be picked up by a number of transporters, one of these transporters being LAT1, most notably being in the brain. Now, methionine and its derivatives are used for a number of different purposes in the body. Once absorbed by the small intestine, methionine will be used for protein synthesis along with all the other amino acids. But over half of the methionine absorbed will perform two main functions in the liver, either contributing to the folate cycle or transsulfuration pathway, which will be used to synthesize S-andosylmethionine, or SAM. SAM will then serve the body inside and outside the liver. SAM will contribute to the cycle of brain chemicals by aiding in the breakdown of serotonin, dopamine, and melatonin, or it will be involved in the production of creatine, carnitine, and cysteine. Creatine is involved in providing the body with quick energy during exercise. Carnitine is involved in fatty acid transport, and cysteine will continue to make further molecules or also build upon protein and protect the liver. But these molecules produced by cysteine will are glutathione, which serves as an antioxidant, and will also contribute to the production of DNA and protein itself, and taurine, which will be used to maintain the cell function and health in general of the cell. So as you can see, methionine and the molecules it contributes towards producing serves the body in a number of ways. Now onto the topic of how methionine will affect chronic disease. There is a strong association that the more methionine you consume, the less likely you are to suffer from fatty liver disease. So much so that methionine and cysteine levels are actually used as one of the biomarkers for liver disease. One of the functions of cysteine, which is derived from methionine, binds to ethanol, preventing your liver from being affected by any ethanol-induced liver injury. So it's definitely not good if you are deficient in methionine and also a heavy drinker. And as stated before, glutathione, which is derived from methionine, is an antioxidant that inhibits oxidative stress that leads to adverse health developments such as cancer. However, there's been associations with diets high in methionine with an increase of cancer and lower life expectancy in mice populations. But that's still, it was shown to have some weak evidence, so it's still being looked into. There's a particular concern with homocysteine and its associations with heart disease. There's contradicting information on homocysteine itself, such as high methionine being seen with higher homocysteine, but also vegans with low methionine in their diets being seen with higher homocysteine levels in general. But this is particularly prevalent in humans that have already had vitamin deficiencies, particularly in with a folate deficiency. So overall, there seems to be more evidence that methionine is beneficial towards preventing certain chronic diseases like liver disease, rather than contributing towards chronic disease developments itself. Now on to the daily reference intake, or the DRI, which is 19 milligrams per day. which is equivalent to about 1.3 grams per 150 pounds. But if your source is mostly plant-based proteins, some recommend actually doubling that intake. Now, the total plasma homocysteine levels appear to be the most plausible biomarker to assess methionine excess, as high homocysteine are usually associated with high intakes of methionine. If methionine was deficient, protein synthesis would be compromised, the main site being the liver. There would also be a risk of edema, skin lesions, weakness associated with compromised protein synthesis, slow growth and mental impairments in children, dementia in older adults, and fatty liver disease. Populations that are the most vulnerable to methionine deficiency are diets that have low protein, such as regions of the world with protein deficiency, those who are malnourished, vegans, vegetarians, etc. The elderly are an additional population that are at risk for deficiency, as they may have trouble consuming a sufficient amount of animal products. Children with certain metabolic disorders also have a greater risk of methionine imbalance, which will leave them with hypermethionine anemia, which is a buildup of methionine in the blood, or an excess level of homocysteine, both of which can lead to intellectual disabilities. In extreme cases, excessive homocysteine in children can also lead to subluxation of the eyelids and osteoporosis. Usually, medical professionals are able to get ahead of these symptoms of deficiency or imbalance in general through high doses of pyro, py, pyrido, excuse me, pyrido, pyridoxine. Sometimes a diet low in methionine will be recommended, but the associations between methionine levels and homocysteine levels are still pretty mixed, even if a methionine contributes to the production of cysteine itself. Research suggests that it may be a result of issues with enzymes instead. Now, methionine has not shown to be directly toxic at high doses. There's not really a way to have too much methionine at one time, as long as the body can metabolize it properly. Because methionine is metabolized into a multitude of molecules, it is rare to have an issue with methionine specifically. But once again, there's a possibility of an excess amount of free methionine in the body, but that's due to the body's inability to metabolize it properly. There's been a study where around 6,000 individuals were given 3 times the daily recommended amount of methionine, and all showed very minimal side effects such as dizziness, sleepiness, and changes in blood pressure, but not too drastic changes. But in a case where an individual took around 70 times the recommended daily amount through an accidental supplementation incident, they ended up dying due to complications from the consequential high blood pressure. So, under most circumstances, it is particularly impossible to ingest an excessive amount of methionine simply through food. So, in general, is methionine toxic? Not really. Now, to the excretion of methionine, there's not really a direct way of getting rid of excess methionine itself. It has to be metabolized and lead to the production of other molecules. There's been research into whether homocysteine itself was actively removed from the human kidneys through their urea cycle, but there was no evidence found that that actually happens. So if there was any extra methionine in the body, it's going to just be metabolized, and the body will decide which molecules it will convert to, depending on the physiological processes that need resources. Now, on to the environmental impact of methionine. So there's been recent efforts in increasing methionine levels in plants in order to prevent methionine deficiencies through providing just more options for vegans and vegetarians. Scientists haven't really found any success through traditional breeding of plants, so they've turned to genetic engineering. Because they're now using GMOs in an attempt to increase methionine levels in the plants, there's concerns on how that will contribute towards the dwindling of biodiversity of native plants, as a consequence of accidental interbreeding with GMOs and taking up space that native plants could take up instead. There's also questions on how the bioavailability of other nutrients are going to be affected by an imbalance of methionine. We don't know for sure how much extra care these plants will be needing to maintain high levels of methionine. And the cost of that care, like wasting fresh water, utilizing large amounts of energy, pesticide use that could lead toward soil pollution, which would interrupt the lives of native flora and fauna, etc. But there's not too much of a movement to increase consumption of methionine in general, especially in cultures that consume a lot of animal products, such as in the U.S.